and Operations at Tamer, and I'm serving as a track co-producer alongside Prashanth Sukal and Eddie Torino for Virtual Track G, Global Issues in Data, Analytics, and Management. It is my pleasure to introduce the next session, CDO version 2.0, the rising star of the C-suite. In this session, you'll hear a panel discuss how to achieve long-term success as a CDO and what it means to be a CDO in today's ever-evolving landscape. Before I hand things over to our panelists, I have a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded. Any presentations will be included in the symposium proceedings, and video recordings will be uploaded to the CDOIQ YouTube channel 3 months after the symposium. There'll be a Q&A session at the end. Please submit your questions via Whova in the Apps Q&A tab. With that, I'll turn things over to the session's panel moderator, Eileen Vildrine, Chief Data and AI Officer, Department of the Air Force. Eileen, over to you to introduce the panelists.
Thank you for including me today. So good afternoon. My name is Eileen Vildrine, and I have the honor to serve as the Chief Data and AI Officer for the Department of the Air Force, which today is a military department with 2 services, United States Air Force and United States Space Force. And today we have 3 amazing leaders in the data space. We have Mr. Ryann Swann, the Chief Data and Analytics Officer of Vanguard. We have Mr. Ron Thompson, the consultant at West River Consultancy and founder of the organization, and Mr. Adita Karkera, who is the Deloitte CDO for government and public sector. And I'm going to ask each of them to talk about and introduce themselves, because these are their roles today, but they are all what I call CDO 2.0. So Ryan, can you go first, please? So Ryan, can you introduce yourself to the group a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Ryann Swann, by way of introduction. I am like Eileen said, I'm the Chief Data and Analytics Officer here at Vanguard. But I've been in the space for over 20 years. I spent a little over a decade in the federal government, all in data analytics. Became a Chief Data Officer in the government before going into the private sector, and I've been a CDO now. This is actually my 3rd time being a CDAO, and I also sit on the Defense Innovation Board for the sector, so very familiar with challenges on the public sector side as well as the private sector side. So looking forward to the chat.
Awesome. And Adita? Can you introduce
Thanks, Eileen. Yeah, thanks, Eileen. Hi, everyone. Adita Karkera. I'm the Chief Data Officer for Deloitte's Government and Public Services. Really excited and honored to be joining this panel. Thank you for having me. So just for means of introduction, today my role is CDO at Deloitte's Government and Public Services. But prior to this role, I spent 21 years with the public sector serving the state of Arkansas. I was honored to be the Deputy Chief Data Officer for the state of Arkansas when the role was first mandated for us in 2017. And at that time, in 2017, Eileen, that's when you and I started to exchange notes on how the role of the CDO was shaping up in the public sector. So a lot of fun stories come to mind as I reflect on that just now. But wow, it's been a fantastic journey, getting the privilege to set up the office of the CDO for the first time there, and then transitioning my role into the industry, where I continue to, set up the office for the CDO for Deloitte's government practice, but also I'm doing a lot of work with just advising CDOs out in the federal and the state government space. So just staying very close to the public sector, which is truly what I believe in. Very excited to continue on with the discussion today.
Thanks. And Ron?
Thank you, Eileen, and thanks for having me. Fellow panel members, it's a privilege to be with you here today. Eileen mentioned where I am today, but let me talk a little bit about where I've been. Just recently retired from NASA in October after about 38 years of government service. if you look back, and we'll talk a little bit about this during our session today, data has sort of been in the fabric of what I've done in various roles in various agencies. So I've been CIO at a couple departments or a couple of bureaus in departments, and principal deputy assistant secretary of the VA. So I've had different roles, and I look back at that at the twilight of my career as a federal civil servant, and look at data was in the fabric of everything. Been very fortunate to support multiple missions, 7 agencies spanning that 38 years, and really looking at, sort of the role of the chief data officer, what we're going to be talking to you today. All those positions were actually in support and service of data. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go on today. But Eileen, thank you again for having me today. Really looking forward to our discussion.
So let's get started. So the role of the CDO, if we look at the new Vantage Partners 2022 survey, it says the tenure of the CDO about 2.5 years. But if we look at our C-suite colleagues, CEOs typically are there 7 years, and our CFO and CIO colleagues about 4.5. So it's really, I think, part of the story is about driving and communicating return on investment. So I'm going to ask each of you, and I'm going to ask Ryan first, what are the most important skills and competencies that a modern CDO needs to succeed to demonstrate that success?
Yeah, it's a great question, Eileen. I think from my perspective, one of the most important things, I'll give you 2. There's a few. I'll just give you 2 for the sake of time. The first is to be able to straddle the fence between the data side, the sophistication of what we do, with the business side of why it matters, right? Oftentimes, as we're trying to communicate value, we need to be able to demonstrate it, test it, empirically, but we also need to work with our stakeholders, work with our business partners, other C-suite executives to get their buy-in, to get their champion, their ambassadorship, in order to actually to validate that value, right? It's one thing for Ryan to say, hey, I created this amount of value, or I reduced this much risk from our ecosystem based off of data management principles, data quality principles, or advanced analytics. It's another thing for my business executives across the table to say, oh no, we created that value, we because we leveraged data and analytics to do it. So that straddling the fence, very important. The other thing I would say is our space is moving quickly, right? Especially when it comes to AI and ML. Everyone is excited about generative AI. There is a lot of hype, but there's some potential. It's not all hype. I assure you, at least that's been my experience. So partnering with other parts of the CIO, the technology officer, but also staying abreast of how this technology is moving, because it's changing the dynamic of the work that we're doing. And I think the softball other one is being able to develop and retain talent. Talent continues to be an issue. Every firm in America, every government across the world wants to do more with data and analytics and data science. And so our ability to attract and retain and develop talent is also important. So that's what I would say.
Thanks, Ryan. Adita, your thoughts?
Thanks, Eileen. And I agree with everything Ryan voiced just now. I want to add a couple more points from my observation. I think there's so many different roles or facets that a CDO has, right? I mean, we're technologists, we're strategists, we're change makers, we're catalysts. We're kind of sort of the glue that keeps all of the other C-suite leaders together, right? We are the change makers in the organization. And so with that in mind, I feel like having the ability to create relationships and continue to foster that literacy that Ryan was talking about earlier is so important, because when you're dealing with different levels of the organization, you have to be able to communicate in their terms and in the
Mhm.
language that they understand. So I think having that perspective in mind, like how do you communicate to, your peer, whether it's the COO or the CIO, and how do you still communicate and get some of your analysts and your data stewards up to the table and make sure that we're all talking the same common language? I think those skills are so important. So we're all speaking the same common language throughout the organization. And I think that requires skills around relationship building and continuing to build, data champions across the organization. So to me, those two are front and center for sure. I cannot also undermine the fact that, CDOs today need to be the ones who are actually driving the change for supporting emerging technology. So, as we are seeing changes come through around the technology changes, I mean, we are the ones who have to continue to be sure that our data house is in order and continue to be the advocates for that topic so that we're not just moving forward with emerging tech without keeping our data house in order, and continue to be that sound voice that's talking about this continuously and consistently with your leadership as well as other levels of the organization.
And Ron?
Eileen, I understand now why we're all together on this panel, because we all lived this journey. Having the technical background is important. This isn't a technical role solely, but having that basis is important. The ability to listen that we just heard, right? Know the business of the organization, know what value and outcomes the businesses want. Have patience. Data liberation is going to take a while. And the last point here I want to make is, the role is a change agent, everything that we just discussed. However, it's really to be the integrator of information and data across the organizations. Obviously, in many organizations, the CIO's responsibility is to keep the lights on, keep things, the infrastructure working, keep things stable as possible, don't have any hiccups. But really, the CDO role is to really look at how data is in different containers and share that information, right? Because a lot of those systems that historically have not been designed to share and to be integrated. So this role, the CDO role is maturing. It is a natural maturation. I think, we heard statistics on the tenure, 4 years for the CIO, 2 years for the CDO. I think we saw that, by the way, that 2-year tenure of the CIO about a decade ago. So those roles are being a little bit more longer in tenure. I think you'll see that as the CDO 2.0, CDO 3.0 actually matures, and organizations really see the value of liberating the data, having that holistic view, having that common way of discussing problems for a particular organization. So I think we'll see that tenure rise. I think the skill sets we'll talk a little bit about later. We're going to be pulling from the same labor pool. A lot of organizations have to, we're fighting for the same talent. So we really need to figure out how to keep that talent and drive the outcomes that we need, and really focus on how that information is integrated across organizations. Back to you, Eileen.
Well, thanks. I mean, the three of you know that I constantly say data and AI are team sports. And I think that's really the story, is that collaborative component is critical moving forward. But Ryan started and he said the hot button word of the day. So I have to dig. So I'm gonna go a little bit faster. And you talked about, hey, I'm on I'm serving on the Defense Innovation Board, which I love to hear. So I'm just going to jump right into it. LLMs, generative AI. What's been your approach to LLM and generative AI? And I'm just going to say emerging tech in general with your portfolios. How do you evaluate? How do you adopt these technologies? How do you align them to business value? How do you get buy-in? Because you're all talking about how you collaborate with C-suite. You got to have your colleagues all in. So what's your thoughts there?
Okay, I'll go first. Yeah, I don't know who you want to go first. So we're taking a parallel approach. So for generative AI, we have been at AI and ML, data science and behavioral science for some time. Work with some language models, but our approach has been twofold. The first is we want to take some low risk use cases, partner with business to kind of build capability, muscle, and know-how, and kind of pick up the low-hanging fruit off of the floor, like those productivity gains, right? That I'm not going to change our business process, but I'm gonna automate some things that used to be routine, that used to be manual in nature, and along that way, I'm going to learn a couple of key things. I'm going to learn how to secure information so that my intellectual property or sensitive information doesn't get regurgitated out in the public sphere. I'm going to learn how to increase accuracy and reduce hallucinations. That's when, for those who may know, I know many of us all do, but that's when a model kind of creates something that does not exist because it can't find typically because it can't find information. So as I'm doing those low risk things, strategically, I'm thinking about the bigger bets. Strategically, I'm thinking about what things are going to transform our organization or our business that's going to be further along. So as I'm building that maturity and that know-how, that muscle, that when I make those big bets, I have a higher chance of success. But in order to do that, Adita, I think you said this a second ago, in order to do that, you got to build some AI and data acumen on the other side with your business stakeholders, right? They got to understand that, hey, this thing is not a bazooka that you fire at everything. You got to get the right tool for the right thing. Sometimes you need a bazooka, sometimes you need a screwdriver, right? So depending on what the use case is and what we want to get behind, then that's gonna allow us to understand, hey, is the generative AI model the right way? Traditional AI, machine learning, or do we just need some great analytics, right? So as we find those use cases and build those capabilities so that we can reduce the risk, give us a better chance for success. And so we're getting people excited with the kind of the productivity gains and that type of thing. And everybody's using it at home and watch their kids use it to write essays and all this type of stuff. So you got the demand, you got the interest. I really think it's a great time to be in data and analytics. Why? Because now there's this example of why data quality is important. Now there's this clear example of why data management and data tagging is important, because garbage in, garbage out, right? And so that's that's been our approach, and it's been a partnership with my organization, our CTO, our privacy office, our risk professionals, and the business, in order to move the organization in that direction. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Ryan. So now we know that we're all on the cool team now. So I'm going to, which is pretty awesome. Okay. So Adita, can you share with us?
Yeah, happy to, Eileen. So two things. I think you asked two questions there. One was around how do you continue to, collaborate and get that buy-in from the CEOs, the CIOs, and other C-suite leaders, which I like to often reference as like my council of chiefs, right? And it all comes back to the point of like, what are we trying to solve for? Like, and what's in it for them to come join the data discussion? I can go out and pitch, I need to do data governance for XYZ reasons, and I need to have governance in place for this reason. But it all comes down to like, what's in it for them and what brings them to the table to continue that discussion. So I think for me, it's been a huge lesson learned over the years is like, as soon as we start off with any critical initiative, it's like, be clear on what success looks like for them. What are my stakeholders wanting to get out of this initiative? And have your plan and your strategy very closely aligned to those outcomes and have clear metrics to define that. Otherwise, it's very easy to get started on multiple initiatives, whether it's Gen AI or others, without having a clear goal and a clear plan in mind. And the last thing you want to do is to like create a strategy which is not actionable. So like kind of keeping in mind like what your strategy is, how to make it actionable, executable, and having clear KPIs that match the requirements of your stakeholders or this council of chiefs is super important to me. Now, Ryan, as you were talking about, how we're approaching LLMs and our approach to Gen AI, I mean, just as any other emerging tech, there are some fascinating things that are possible with emerging tech, operational efficiencies that are possible. The use cases are so many. But I think for me, what's important is that we continue to handle emerging tech with the right guardrails in mind. And especially when we're looking at creating capabilities that cater to the government space, I think it's even more critical that we have our responsible AI techniques in mind as we create capabilities that we send back to market. So like having the right guardrails about, is the output that we are creating, or our algorithms, are they trustworthy? Are they dependable? Can I actually pitch those back to our government executives to use? I think those are super critical for me. And of course, you can't get all of that until you have all of your data foundational pieces in order as well. So like, it's a balanced approach, right? AI has great potential, Gen AI has great potential, but we just gotta continue to find the right use cases, which we're doing right now, and continuing to figure out the right guardrails as we continue to go conquer and get some quick wins around it.
That's awesome. And Ron, what's your thoughts?
So really want to amplify what Adita said, and Ryan, absolutely that's an approach on focusing on the outcomes for the business. That will get, the C-suite's attention and focus and energy behind this. But I want to talk a little bit about how this was done specifically at NASA. How did we really align that collaboration, and what approach did we use for emerging tech? And what we did was took a human-centered design approach to align the organization, to align the expertise of really, and NASA is a world leader in emerging tech. Just look at what the mission is, and we use that approach to look at pain points across the organization and where those touch points actually interjected. And what we found were the slivers of focus, were outcome based. And this allowed us to really organize the organization across different missions, different objectives for the organization. So we took emerging tech like AI, machine learning, and got the buy-in from the owners, the business owners, and those that had the resources, quite frankly, to do that. This cannot be, the role of CDO cannot be really a burden for the organization. Very few additional resources come to bear, as we all know and live. So you really have to take and be clever and be really innovative on how to align those resources are there. And then make sure the contributing organizations track the actual improvements that you're doing. So you have a little CMMI in there, a little process improvement that we do, but lining up what we just heard, lining up to outcomes versus output, not governance, right? Or not a heavy-handed regulatory focus, but really focusing on the outcomes of the business really brings that collaboration and really make sure those emerging tech that best of breed actually is out there and is aligned holistically across the organization. So that's sort of how we did it. But yeah, I think, looking at that outcome focus is absolutely critical. That's the only way, in my opinion, to get that buy-in for any organization.
Thanks, Ron. So I'm going to pivot a little bit, and I'm going to ask Adita to go first, because this is the question that if I had Jeopardy, you would all be buzzing in on. Okay, we've talked about emerging tech, okay, but we also have to find that balance between how do you navigate the data management, regulatory and ethical considerations, privacy, security, risk mitigation. How do you balance managing that risk at the same time as building capability, especially emerging tech capability?
Yeah, fantastic question, Eileen. Yes, and just like the game of Jeopardy, I would be like, yes, I want to go first. So thank you for picking on me. You're right. I mean, there are so many nuances that as CDOs and data leaders we have to deal with, right? As we think about creating internal data capabilities and products, it's a very careful balance that you have to have in play to make sure that you are using the data in the methods and the means that are the regulations lay out for it, right? So I personally feel very strongly about the ethical considerations around the data usage. So are we collecting data? Are we using data? Are we applying data and then sharing that back commensurate to what the governing regulations are? So to me, it seems like, the privacy team, the security team, like the CISO and the CPO and the CDO, like, are best friends, right? We have to work in coordination. It's not just the role or the responsibility of just one C-suite leader or just the CDO to take that responsibility and say, hey, I'm going to cover all of this. So I think what I've learned through my journey, Eileen, definitely is that being friends and being close collaborators with your CISO, CPO, and the other C-suite people is essential, because they are the ones who are subject matter experts in each area. And when we come together and we join hands and we kind of keep the broader mission needs in mind, that's when success happens. A CDO can be the collaborator and the glue that keeps it together, but we can't do it all by ourselves. But I want to be very conscious about the areas that we can make a difference in, which is around, adhering to our policies that have been laid down around the whole data lifecycle, right? Like, are we using data for the purposes we said we're collecting it for? Are we truly adhering, and it's especially important when you talk about citizen data, right? When I talk to government CDOs, it's like, okay, I collected this data on behalf of the citizen. Am I really being conscious about leveraging it for the purposes that I explained it at the time of collection? And that's where I feel like the ethical considerations and the human aspect comes in. And we as CDOs and data leaders are really uniquely positioned to be able to be leaders in that space and help others understand the nuances of not following those regulations and those considerations. So if you can tell, I'm very passionate about the fact that, there are regulations, there are policies, there are also the ethical and the human considerations, which I think the CDOs should be driving, and I firmly believe in that.
Thanks. And Ron, I know that you share some common threads, but can you expand and share a little bit, please?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand the regulations and why that was done. So this is more of a why comment, Eileen. Regulations at least in the federal space. I'll just caveat it with that. I think are done with good intentions, but people, I think, tend to sort of lead with that out of the gate and not really align with that trust and partnership that we just talked about, right? And I call it the so what factor, Eileen. You're doing those things, so what? How is it really helping the mission? So, the CDO role has to be sort of understand the regulations and why it's important and how to tell the story for a particular agency or company or organization. But also why it's being done is, to drive either quality, right? Ensure that we do privacy. So those are all really good things, but I would just caution folks either new to the role or taking it from the first generation to the second generation CDO. Really don't lead with this. Understand the why and the intent of what the regulatory focus is, and figure out for your organization how best to use those things to drive the outcomes for the organization. So it's really a balanced approach. That partnership and trust is, you'll hear this as a common theme probably from all of our questions today. That trust and partnership is really important. And then tell the story for your agency, that is going to meet the intent of what's being asked, but and drive a change. So that's the other part of at least on the federal side. But do the right thing, and there's a way to do it. There's a way to balance it. It should be done in partnership. I love the way you said that, Adita. It's really a partnership, and the roles need to be a congruent goal that align to those objectives.
Thanks, Ron. And Ryan, you come from the financial world, so I know there are rules. So
Yeah.
Your perspective.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, Eileen. And listen, I totally echo Ron and Adita's comments. I think early in my career, I thought of data management, data governance, kind of the offense and defensive side of our role, that you kind of got to have both. And now I'm at a place where they more come together, and it's not playing offense and defense. I need a better analogy. It's like you're doing both at the same time, and you have to find ways to incorporate it into what you do. And so when we rolled out our data and AI strategy at Vanguard, across to like set the stage a little, on stage in front of all of our officer corps was the chief privacy officer with me. We were two peas in the pot. Like, we're doing this together. We're building capability with privacy by design. We're going to roll out a language model, but it's gonna inherently redact PII information, so we don't end up with a data lake full of unnecessary PII, right? So you start to move you start to be more proactive than reactive when it comes to like the defensive side of what we're doing. I think that as we move into this era where our citizens, our clients, our customers are becoming more astute to the value of their data now more than ever, I think it's on us as government, as industry, to realize that data is an asset. And in finance, we have two assets of our clients: their capital and their data, right? And so while they want us to use it to help them be successful and reach their investment goals, we actually owe them a level of responsibility to do it in a way that is responsible to the point made earlier, that we're using it the way that we said they were going to use it. And as you think about the spirit of the regulation, sometimes we have to be a set of leaders, a set of C-suite executives that thinks about the spirit of what the regulations are trying to do, and think about how does that align with our moral obligation, right? And then just do it. Because if you do that, it really doesn't matter. Chances are, when the regulation finally comes out and they adjust it, chances are you're going to be pretty well aligned. You're going to be in a good place. Maybe you have to make some tweaks, but that's because you kind of got an understanding of, hey, they're making it for a reason. Why? Because nobody wants their data exposed or put on the dark web, whatever the case is, or used for unapproved purposes. And so you got to bring those things kind of together. And so that's how I think about the balance. That's where we're at in kind of balancing the offense and the defense, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And so now I'm going to pivot again. Okay. And I'm going to ask my colleague from space to go first, because I will be honest. I asked each of you to participate today because you guys are trailblazers in this space. You have really had really compelling data leadership journeys, and you've made pivots in your career. I'm going to ask each of you to share how you made those pivots, because it's going to be part of our journey too, and any notable lessons. And so, Ron, I look at NASA, cool space, large organization, now to startup. Can you share a little bit with us?
Sure, Eileen. I've been very blessed. I'll just start with that. I look back at my journey, and I couldn't have scripted it any better than how it worked. I started my federal career after serving in the Army at the Census Bureau. So, hey, we have all the data and information about every citizen in the United States. So I've gone through sort of the technical track. And, like I said, I've been a CIO at other agencies, and then finished that 30 plus year at NASA. Absolutely love that. Love the journey, love everything. Each agency I learned from and just did something different. But I go back and look at that, and I think these were foundational blocks for me. And then, having a business degree helped as well, be able to talk to the business. So that's another thing I just want to share. It provided that technical foundation to understand how the underpinnings work, but the ability to understand the business outcomes, right? No matter, however complex or trivial the organizations are, and then how to measure from efficiencies to effectiveness. And where I am in my journey right now is, with this consultancy that I've started up, I want to help organizations take those lessons learned and build on that to be more effective in the future. So that's where I am. I saw, Eileen, probably about a decade, 8 years ago, data being more prominent in roles of organizations. I saw private industry sort of shift to, they were just calling it the CDO role. And I knew from my career that I wanted to focus more on the effectiveness of organizations. And I saw data and the role of data being that mechanism to do that. So, so that's how, and again, it wasn't scripted 30 plus years ago. A lot of this doors open for me at the right time, having the right mentorship, and many of those folks are out in the audience today. And I want to thank everyone for that help, and partners that helped me get there. But really seeing that focus of making organizations more, it's not just a bottom line, it's not just an ROI focus, right? But making them more effective and bringing in automation to making them more effective. That's the other dual role of this role. All by liberating data for organizations. That's just it. I still have a lot of passion for this. There's a lot of I think commercially and in the public sector, a lot more work that we need to do here. And we need to be able to share, like forums like we're doing today, share our stories, right? Learn from each other, right? Because you'll see these common threads hit, and we're not on an island alone. We're all dealing with a lot of the same problems, because and the last point I'll make, Eileen, before I go back to you, is people are the common denominator through all organizations. People are. So think about that. Missions vary, public-private sectors vary on how you do certain things, but people are always at the at the root of that. So how you work with people, how you come alongside, how the partnerships work are very, very critical.
Thanks, Ron. Adita, state or public sector at the state level to international consulting group with an expanded focus into federal data. Thoughts?
Yeah, Eileen. Lots to cover, I guess, and I'll try to stay focused on a few points. But yeah, I mean, I spent 21 years serving the state of Arkansas, doing everything possible in the data and analytics space. And, of course, got the privilege to set up the office of the CDO in 2017, very early, when we were still trying to figure out what the role of the CDO means in government. What are the deliverables? We had a tall mandate from the General Assembly on things to get done with limited or none resources and budgets. So it was definitely a challenge on, making sure that we were leveraging the people we have at hand in the right way and getting the right things done. So had a fantastic time setting up our first data governance program there, our data inventory statewide program there. And then COVID happened, and got the privilege to serve on Governor Hutchinson's COVID-19 Technical Advisory Board, which was great, because I think we were one of the few states that included the data people in the Technical Advisory Board. So it was a privilege to kind of help make some key decisions around how the state was addressing the pandemic at that point. And soon after that, I transitioned over to Deloitte. And a couple of reasons as I did that move was, I was then able to kind of expand my reach to multiple government organizations, like you said, not just state government, but also federal, and kind of use my experience and my lessons learned and share that out with the other government organizations that were either attempting to create new data program offices or were trying to understand the role of the CDO. And, that's when the Evidence Act of 2018 came about, was signed in 2019. So we've had several federal government organizations standing up their data program offices. So as I pivoted over in this new role and took over the CDO shop for Deloitte Government and Public Services, it we set up the office from the get-go. So I'm the inaugural CDO for that office. And, I saw that Deloitte, of course, has amazing talent, fantastic infrastructure, and the latest in tech. So you're like, well, let's bring all these things together, knowing what the needs of our government organizations are. We know how they are trying to bring about changes and efficiencies, and how not only how we deliver services back to our citizens, but I mean, also on the other side of the spectrum, how we're handling matters of national security. So like, how can we use our capabilities to make things better for the government organizations who are trying to solve these very complex problems? So we focused on building data capabilities and AI capabilities that we can then take back to the government executives to make their lives easier, to help them accelerate their journey as CDOs and data program officers. And two things I want to point out that that from my lessons learned, we have just launched something which I'm calling the CDO playbook for government CDOs. And that's really focused on my lessons learned and lessons learned from my peers and colleagues in Deloitte on how the CDO can have like a playbook to use in the different parts of the data lifecycle. So whether you're starting a data program office, whether you're setting up your data literacy program, you're on the offensive or the defensive, how do you have a playbook that can kind of be like a guide to you in your journey? So that's something we have just implemented, and that includes lots of my personal lessons learned on how we can shape the role of the CDO in the government space, which I'm super passionate about. And then the second thing, Eileen, is, as you and I both are very passionate about improving the state of women in data. And so a lot of my focus has been also on how do we continue to improve the equation of women in the federal government space. And I continue to be inspired by all the work that you spearhead, Eileen, in that space. Just I'm stoked at the opportunity that's available for other females to be doing in the government space. Back to you.
Awesome. So yes, I think we share a lot, Ryann. Federal sector to financial sector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I definitely echo the thoughts of my comments. I think to when I think about those thinking about making a pivot, I would say find a way to explain your tangential connection to that industry. For me, I was at Treasury. I then went and worked on the White House data cabinet, and then I went into finance in the private sector. So my experience at Treasury, while connected me to it, or maybe you're used to working in regulated industries, right? And understands the rigor that comes with working in regulated industries like healthcare, pharma, finance, and defense, right? And so find that connection, but always remember that, listen, a lot of organizations really appreciate like outside opinion, outside of the box thinking, right? Because sometimes in firms, we kind of get in our own four walls and you got this echo chamber going, and you need the person from the state government that's done it someplace else in the world to come in and bring those those outside ideas in a way that can really take you to the next level. So don't be afraid to like connect your experience to something totally different, right? And that's I think that's what I've done. The last thing I'll say is find something that you can get excited about. You know what I mean? If you're in one sector, you want to move to another sector, if you can be excited about it and passionate about it and willing to learn it and kind of sit down with the business, to Ron's point, and understand what it takes to be successful in that business, and that excites you, then your technical chops will help you the rest of the way. And so that's how we think about pivoting. I think there's tons of options. You just got to find the thing that's right for you, and then connect your experience to it, because they're looking for outside opinions. Why? Because if they had it figured all out, they wouldn't be looking for a CDL. They wouldn't be looking for it. So that's how I think about pivoting.
So just a quick summary, lots of threads there. Be bold and intentional. Love what you do. Be passionate. Self-starters, but I'm also going to say, I also hear a lot of what I'm going to say, grassroots grit. Like you start and being, persevering. So there's a lot there that
generation, especially if you're first generation in that organization. because that's like a startup. That's like, you know, if you're the first one, then you gotta build it. You gotta be a builder. So yeah.
Awesome. So I'm going to pull the thread one more time before we pivot to questions, and I do want to have time because they're awesome questions in the poll. I'm just going to say, I think we all have heard this morning that CDOs are shaping the future workforce. And we also heard that the war on talent is fierce. So what's your, I'm going to say, rapid question round on your thoughts on where we're going workforce wise? And I'm going to start with Adita first.
Thanks, Eileen. Yeah, I mean, as far as where we're going for the workforce, again, you know, I think it's a core quality that the CDO has to have, right? Like, you know, how are we building our workforce to not only be data fluent, have the right data acumen to be able to support the ever evolving data landscape that we're living in, but also the role of AI fluency right now, as we start getting into, you know, as we were talking about earlier, Gen AI or LLMs, you know, building a workforce that is data fluent and AI fluent. And of course, you know, when we talk about the data acumen, you know, it changes at different levels of the organization. And if you kind of pick that thread up from what we were talking about, like the privacy, security, and the ethical considerations, if the right doers in your organization don't understand how to use data and the privacy and the security considerations around it, they won't be able to apply data correctly. So, you know, literacy, acumen, whatever you want to call it, differs from what your role is and what you're expected to deliver. But the key thing, I think, as CDOs is like we develop our programs to continue to upskill our workforce and keep them prepared, because otherwise, you know, we would continue to create the coolest apps and the coolest dashboards, but if nobody understands it and nobody is able to trust it, you know, there's no point in creating those. So unless we're able to, you know, interpret it, comprehend it, create actionable insights from it, and be able to trust it and know that it's done ethically, I think a lot of that is not going to be leveraged, right? One thing that we're starting to do internally is, you know, we're of course rolling out our own data literacy program in the firm, but we're also continuing to create champions across the practice who we call our CDO rock stars, which is our community that we're developing to help continue to shape future leaders. Because, you know, they are the ones who are going to be leading this tomorrow. And it's important for us to invest in all women, minorities, as well as other champions who are stepping up and saying, you know, I want to know how data leaders function. Help me understand this. So we're making a very, very deliberate focus on helping grow that next bench of leaders so that our future is solid. Back to you, Eileen.
Ron, thoughts?
Just a quick couple things. I mean, I think, you know, I got the best advice from an astronaut when I got to NASA is the approach you take to shaping the future, and then I'll answer about the workforce, is to take a light, consistent touch. You know, like I liken it to an egg on a gas pill of a car. You know, you have an egg right underneath it. So a light, consistent approach is going to win the day. So that's what I found about how the role shaping the future. Then I want to talk about the workforce. You know, I think make sure that we celebrate the success of the work, number one, and the approach that our workforce take on making the impact for the organization. Make sure it's valued, and they are valued. The impact is celebrated. And then lastly, the point is to simplify. You know, we talked a lot about complex dashboards and how you have to be an expert in these things. You really need to simplify things that are factual, that has the veracity of information, you know, that's accurate. But you want to make sure how you tell that story is in a simplistic way. Now that's an art and a science together. So those are the skill sets, and I think I think this next wave of next generation is going to think like that out of the box. They're going to look at simplification. They're going to look at demanding information at their fingertips 24/7. They're going to look at being recognized and being valued. That's going to be important, and we need to recognize that, and we need to celebrate that.
And Ryan.
Yeah, listen, I totally agree with my colleagues, and I echo them. I ditto it, +1 all around. The one thing I would add is when I think about externally to the building, externally to that, to the recruitment, is the partnerships that we have with universities to help continue to build the latest and greatest skill set in that next generation, right? I think our next generation will see generative AI in a very different light. They probably will come into the workforce with a generative AI assistant that really helps them find the knowledge in the find the institutional knowledge in the organization. And they got to be able to understand the risks and the ways, the prompt engineering in order to do that, which means that the internships that we give, that the projects that we partner with academia on, it's going to evolve and change. And so we've been partnering closely. I know NASA does a bunch of stuff with high schools and universities. I remember back when I was in high school, I did a thing at Goddard outside of DC. I know Deloitte does tons of stuff. And so when I think about that next generation and how we prepare them for the future that they're coming into and what we're going to need as a society, I think that there's a role for CDOs to play in partnering with STEM organizations, STEM parts of universities, and the business side of universities, the liberal arts side of the university, because this is starting to come together. And so it's an area that I think is important for us as an industry.
Thanks, Ryan. And so we have tons of questions in the end, but there's several threads and this truly has to be lightning round, and like we could have a whole hour on this one. The reality is we have a lot of people saying, where does the CDO belong in the organization? And like I said, we could spend a whole hour. Ryan, where does the CDO belong?
I think it either belongs, I report to the CIO, Chief Information Officer. I think it either belongs there or belongs to a direct report to the CEO. I think Eileen broke up for a
second. Eileen may have had some technical challenge. Yeah. I can go. Ryan, respect and echo what you said earlier, but I also think like CDOs belong in a place where they can drive and have the right influence and be able to drive the change needed. So irrespective of, the ops model for each organization, because every organization is different, I think it just depends on the culture of that organization and the position where you can really drive change.
Yeah.
Over to you, Ron.
Yeah, and I look at it as a maturation. I think alignment to the technical delivery of the organization early makes sense. But then when you start getting barriers, that's where you need the top cover coming in, So it may be CDO 2.0, 3.0, but the resistance that you're going to have to liberate your data across organizations may not be able to be I would say properly have the attention in a support function like the CIO. So it depends. There's not one answer. So it depends on where your organization is, what value they want, right? Where you are in the maturation. So Eileen, back to you. I know we have some other questions.
Yeah. One other question that I'm going to ask is, we have folks in the chat that are specifically asking, I'm going to say, how do you communicate, or how do you, do we have an example of how to bring that C-suite leader on board? Mm-hmm. And I will share, like when I was a startup, I work in the Pentagon. I literally knocked on senior leaders' doors, and it's hard to say no when somebody knocks on your door. But do you guys have some thoughts?
Yeah. I'll jump on this, and Ryan, I'll pitch to you. This is a COVID example. I think when the pandemic first happened, a lot of organizations were struggling with, the facts. right? The bed, where is the virus, geographically spreading, right? Where's the bed information for local areas, right? So we needed a way to get to that data to protect our people in NASA. I was able to work with the Federal CDO Council and HHS, CDC to bring that information and really help our medical team get a handle on that. They were doing a lot of manual work going out to local hospitals. So we were able to bring in automation through a visualization technique that enabled them to protect our workforce in a more efficient way, more effective way. And that's, we're sort of out of COVID right now, but that's sort of what we saw. And really the role of the CDO is to do that, is to take information, to protect our people, to create greater value for the organization. And once that happened, then it was like, okay, this can really help. And that community really became a big advocate of the CDO role in NASA.
Ryann?
Yeah. I think for me, one of the big ways to do it, there's a bunch of ways. I'm just giving you one. Is to find a way to balance the low-hanging fruit from the big things that you need to do. You need to solve data governance, you need to solve data quality. But what's the thing that I can help you with, executive business, a leader that's gonna give you a win and give you something to hold up as to become an ambassador for data, even when I'm not in the room, right? And so there's this balance between, hey, there's these big things that we got to do, and they're hard and they're foundational, and we all know we got to do them. But then they're the things that are gonna get that person on board. And so a lot of times I just find ways to say yes to them. I find ways to put together the SEAL Team 6 that's gonna go in, and in a month they're gonna knock something out for you real quick. And get it going. They may not do it the best architecture. They may not do it the best, with the best technology, but it's going to get a win. It's going to get you in our camp, right? So you got to find ways to get people on board, so that you have ambassadors when you're not in the room, because that's going to be important. And then you get to turn it from a push to a pull, right? Versus me pushing it, oh, you should do this, to them pulling it and then coming back. Them pulling you in. So,
Adita, you get the last word.
Thanks, Eileen. So really quick, I know we're right at time, but a couple of things I agree completely about, finding the right sponsors, the right champions who are going to continue to drive your force forward, because you cannot be in all places all the time. So finding the right champions who can continue to drive that cultural change for you is important. Finding what are these stakeholders wanting to get done. So unless they're interested in, and again, coming back to what's in it for me, unless we find that and define that, it's hard to just go and say, oh, I want to create the role of the CDO here, right? I mean, what is the CDO going to deliver? Mission-wise, aligned to their organizational goals is important, and it's important to be clear about it. So, and thirdly, we talk about quick wins. I think those are critical. You have to identify what's the low-hanging fruit, find your quick wins, but my mantra always has been find your quick win aligned to your long strategic goal. Don't just go out and just grab quick wins, but align them to what you want to do strategically over the long term. So kind of keeping those three things in mind, I think have found to be successful. And then of course, we're starting to see the evolution of the agency data officers, which, we started in 2018. We said the CDO alone can't do everything. So we started creating agency data officers in different departments, in the state departments, and started to get them together to say, these are my champions. You're going to drive change statewide or across an organization, a federal organization or so. So the rise of this agency data officers, the bureau data officers are going to be the champions to take that forward too.
So one, anxiously waiting the CDO playbook, can't wait to see it. So please share quickly because we're looking for it now. I'd like to thank these rising CDO stars. Your data and AI are team sports. Thank you for being great teammates for us. I will say there's lots more questions. Eileen.Vildrine at us.af.mil. Let's keep the conversation going, and I'm going to pivot it back to our sponsor.
All right. Thank you all so much for such a great conversation. This was fantastic. I want to tell everyone else there'll be an 1.5-hour break for Track G, and then we'll be back at 2 p.m. for a session on value creation in biopharma R&D with data-driven decision making. So thank you all for attending.